again. I stopped last time because the first little part of this video is just her talking about kind of politics, and it's not something I'm interested in really getting into. Video by Brett Cooper, The Growing Regret Among Trans Teens. And here's a fun game you can play. Try to figure out and predict when she's going to break into a advertisement. The first one doesn't count in this video because she doesn't really do a clever transition. Here's another thing you might want to look at. Check this out. From, what is it? Milky Way over Cervantes, Australia. It is Australia, yeah. Alright. Making sure I'm not saying Australia when I should be saying Austria. Yeah. Not just good for, a prison for criminals. Alright, here we go.
Can't just be undone by another
Laser
president
focused.
4 years from now. Well, in my opinion, people need to be hit in the face with the facts about these procedures and the lasting effects that they have on people, specifically on developing minds, specifically on American children. And the thing is, changing people's minds on this is not an impossible feat. It is happening in countries around the world, just not here in America. Now, in this episode, I'm going to be joined by my good friend Chloe Cole, and we're going to talk about why America is so...
I've heard about Chloe Cole before. I think she's the girl who would talk to Jordan Peterson, just kind of the de facto leader of this whole movement, maybe. I guess I don't know. She might be spearheading some of it, anyways.
Ridiculously behind on this issue. We're also going to break down the recent bombshell studies that should horrify Americans and jolt our government into action if they weren't so cucked by their own freaking flawed ideology. Before we get into all of that, make sure that you like this video if you enjoy it, and subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell if you want to stay up to date on every single episode. I also want to remind you guys that this is the last week to buy my exclusive launch merch. This is the merch collection.
That one doesn't count because she didn't do some sort of, flamboyant transition
That we created just for the launch, this launch period of the Brett Cooper Show. We have had an amazing first month. I'm so grateful for all of your support. I'm so grateful that you guys are so excited about the merch. So we're going to be closing those sales, and I'm so excited to get you all your hoodies and your hats and your t-shirts. Now, in addition to those executive...
This is something I would like to actually clarify first here. I think one of the things that would be really important if you ever wanted to verify like the safety of transition surgeries, and one of the things that is, I've said this before, I think that is present in a lot of the statistics you would see maybe is like a very short-term analysis after the fact, maybe. But there seems to be some new information coming out here. But I think the idea would be maybe that like in a very short period of time after they get transitioned, there might be a type of honeymoon phase of sorts. That's my theory, that you maybe would see like a very short term like increase in health or health or well-being, like happiness on their part, because this is all new and they're getting validated at every turn to some extent, but well, at least by certain groups of people, and it's all very exciting, right? But after that wears off, and after they age into a period of their life where they might actually want those things that they gave up, like especially for kids, they start realizing what they actually gave up. Like that would be an interesting thing to
Orders
study.
obviously being a very relevant and pressing issue. This week also had Detransitioner Awareness Day. It was actually just yesterday. And Chloe, who is a detransitioner and who you will hear from in just a couple of minutes, among a few others, traveled to DC for an entire week of meetings and events to share their stories and advocate for the protection of children and for the support that their community so desperately needs, that they're not getting from our government, from society, and most importantly and horrifyingly, not from the medical community. And this is obviously especially important because of the legislation that Trump and the Republican Congress want to pass, but also because of what is happening around the world. And that is why this week is why I wanted to talk about this today. I mean, guys, what I want you to know is that countries that are far more progressive than us, that were actually at the forefront of this issue many years ago, pushing this entire ideology, are now scaling back and realizing that it has been taken too far. That these awful experimental procedures and surgeries are actually not that great and not doing what they were promised. And this is on full display in the UK. And guys, it is just so...
A weird thing. Does it seem strange to anyone that like the Scandinavian countries are like the most progressive countries ever? Like, it just seems somehow intuitively off that the people who are like super far north are somehow like just really, really progressive. Like I would think like soft southern countries where everything is nice all the year round would be the most progressive, but no, it's.
So gratifying to see the scientists and the academics and the experts finally hold themselves accountable
For
after
the record, I do live in a relatively northerly country, so you know maybe that's my own bias.
so many years and acknowledge their own biases through these studies, through their reports, which is something that you would see regularly if you were a student at Peterson Academy. And if you are
Oh,
not up to date on the
see,
best new academic
miss.
platform out
I even watched this before and I didn't. I kind of missed that one.
there, Peterson Academy is Jordan Peterson's new online university that is open for enrollment right now. And so if you are somebody like me who loves lifelong learning and wants to learn from the releases 4 new in-depth 8-hour university level courses that are taught
I'll
by
let it play for a
world-renowned
little bit.
experts and professors, and they are produced specifically to keep you fully engaged. This is not your normal boring college lecture. This is something totally different. They cover an amazing range of topics from philosophy to history to psychology to science to business. So you're ready to challenge your intellect, to expand your
Okay.
horizons, and take
I think
control
that's
of
about the
your
end of it.
continuing education. It is time to go to petersonacademy.com/Brett. And guys, you do not have to be at a certain point in your life or a certain age to benefit from Peterson
Oh,
Academy. I
sweet
think that
glory.
this will be an incredible resource for homeschool families. This is something that I would have just been. They were paying $599 per year versus a month plus the community with a 7-day money-back guarantee, but I highly doubt you will need it. I have been on Peterson Academy. I've been taking the classes. They are truly top-tier, high caliber. You guys will love them. And guys, best part, in my opinion, is that for that price, for $599 a year, you do not have to go out and take out some $60,000 student loan to further your education. Again, that is petersonacademy.com/Brett to get started
Okay.
and join
There
Peterson
we go.
Academy today. Now, the latest bombshell example of this accountability, of this self-awareness, of finally being honest about these procedures, came out just a couple of weeks ago through the Oxford Journal. They released their findings after studying over 107,000 patients with gender dysphoria and found that yes, unequivocally, those who underwent sex change surgeries, who went through with the entire medical procedures of transitioning, faced higher risks of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and substance abuse.
See, and there might be a difference here also between like adults versus children, where like, I'm not saying it's good for adults, but I'm saying they would be less of a shock once they actually start growing into. I guess I don't know. Adults do a lot more weird stuff to their bodies and seem to be okay with it. But like if you're a child, like the ability to actually make some sort of responsible decision about your future, given that you don't know what you're gonna feel like or what you're gonna want, probably next month, much less 20 years down the road, is the potential for regret would seem exponentially increased.
After undergoing those procedures. And this was released just on February 25th, 2025. And more specifically, this study found that males with gender transition surgery were 120% more likely to have depression and 388% likelier to have anxiety than males who had gender dysphoria without surgical intervention. Gender dysphoric females were 56% likelier to have depression and 48% likelier to have anxiety if they had undergone gender transition surgery. So obviously it is still an increase, but those numbers for men who underwent these surgeries, that is shocking. And obviously, as you saw, there is an increase for women, but that dramatic increase for men, that is horrifying. And for anybody who has been paying attention over the last couple of years, who has been following and advocating for this issue, those numbers probably don't shock.
It does feel like people have been very gun ho about this thing, which if you're in a scenario where all of the science points towards it, it might be easy to ignore one's good sense or conscience or something like that. That's a problem actually with scientific endeavors. It feels like sometimes there's I don't know what you would call it, shall we say a temporary halting point in innovation or discovery that allows for some very nasty conclusions to be drawn. There was a point in, I'm thinking like the 1800s or something, where polygenesis or gene, I don't know, what the idea that like the human species had multiple ancestral trees, right? We didn't all come from the same ancestor, and therefore there were a lot of people, well-educated people, who would have concluded that we were actually different species. There was the Caucasians, there was the Asians, and then there was the Africans, and these were all different species, and they wouldn't have been considered maybe even to some extent like human in the same way that Caucasians would. This is a thing that actually I think persisted maybe into the 1900s. Like 1914 might have been the last time I think some paper was published with that as like a credible type of theory. But yeah, like you can come to, given that there's like a what seems to be convenient stopping places or seeming dead ends when it comes to scientific discovery, you can come to some really nasty ethical conclusions based on that. Like if you're just going off of, oh yeah, this is the I don't know, intellectual conclusion to come to.
Us at all. I mean, I saw this report come out and I was like, of course the numbers increased. Obviously, that is common sense because these surgeries and these procedures, they are a band-aid situation. They will never address the root problem. And so, of course, there are going to be higher risks of depression and anxiety. And it's not just common sense that should tell us this. There are other studies like this. I mean, last year, a Finnish study found that patients who
To be fair, I think there are a lot of studies that say a lot of different things. But again, like I was saying at the beginning of this, I would like to see studies that show, like, not just 5 years after, but like 10, 20, 30 years after, like, what levels of well being or whatever are possible at that point. And how that would maybe correlate to like to what degree of transition they have versus like just getting some sort of top surgery versus getting like the entire thing yanked out of them, like whatever that would entail, like in how that would also correlate to like the after effects or the afterlife of the patients.
proceeded to gender affirming treatments did not have a reduction in mental crises or suicidal ideation. That came out February 16th of 2024. They also found that usually, wow, there were underlying mental health issues that needed to be addressed in addition to gender dysphoria that might have caused gender dysphoria. In 2019, this is another crazy example. A Swedish study was done. This is a study that is now very well referenced in the LGBTQ community, and they found a decrease in mental health treatment after medically transitioning. But guys, less than a year after that report came out, that study, that key study that was now referenced everywhere, that was used to push this issue forward, shoved in our faces, was officially corrected. It was
No evidence of gender affirming surgeries, allowing scientific proves evidence basis. Huh.
analyzed in the American Journal of Psychiatry came in and clarified that, quote, the results of the reanalysis demonstrated no advantage of surgery in relation to subsequent mood or anxiety disorder related healthcare visits or prescriptions or hospitalizations following suicide attempts. I mean, that is crazy. Again,
Sorry, my brain
months
glitched
later,
out for there a second.
suicide disorder related healthcare visits or prescriptions or
9 months after the study's original publication, the result of anxiety disorder. Blah, 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 blah. Hmm.
hospitalizations following suicide attempts. I mean, that is crazy. Again, 9 months later. Then, in 2024, an American study was finally released because all of this was done overseas that also confirmed all of this. But their sample size was only 1,500 patients, so obviously it did not get the attention or the credibility that it probably deserved. So basically, we, on the common sense side of this issue, and all of the researchers have been saying this for years. We have been sounding the alarms. People like Chloe Cole, like Riley Gaines have been sounding the alarms, but this new study from the Oxford Journal, with its magnitude, with its scope, with its size, and its damning outcomes.
This is a point that's kind of maybe important too. Like, as a general rule, I don't like using the term "everybody knows a thing," but I've mentioned this before in a couple of my videos that, well, I say a couple, at least one of them, I think, where if everybody knows a thing and it's a thing that's born of their own unique perspective, not because they heard it from, Joe from the gas station. If this is a thing that's like kind of a general consensus of humanity, everybody knows it, and it's a thing that's born of their own experience or their own perspective. It feels like that is significant, and it's not something that can be dismissed lightly. And it feels like this is a thing that, with regards to gender affirming surgery, it has been just no. Everybody knew the world was flat, kind of that same.
Is pretty hard to refute. And my good friend Chloe, who you guys probably know, is a teen detransitioner who started puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones at age 13, who then underwent a double mastectomy at age 15, agreed with all of this, and she came on the show to share the validation that a study like this brings to her and her entire community.
I mean, it really affirms, like, not only my own experiences with going through the entirety of transition, especially the surgery, but also that of all of my other detransition friends who've also had these surgeries and these other individuals who've reached out to me and have gone through them. It's almost kind of vindicating that there are studies now that are showing the harms of what these surgeries do, not only physically, but also psychologically. And it really takes down this narrative that
I think especially when you're a kid, like actually, I think in any scenario, when a person is going through something like gender dysphoria or something, like it feels like the moral thing to do when a person is insane is to stop them from doing crazy stuff that will affect their future, hopefully until they get to a point in their lives where they can actually act or think responsibly. And a child is kind of in that state of mind, regardless of their mental conditions. Otherwise, they are in that state of mind where they, like I said, as a parent, as a person who wants to act responsibly with regards to people with mental stuff, the moral thing to do is to stop them from doing crazy stuff, including but not limited to, chopping their bits off. In my humble opinion.
these surgeries are beneficial to the patient, that they create better outcomes for mental health and overall quality of life.
And I wanted Chloe to come on, and I wanted you guys to hear her story and continue hearing her story because it tells you why these studies, why all of these reports are so vital. Because parents are literally told that their gender dysphoric children will die if their parents do not help them transition. Many parents are threatened into agreeing to these experimental procedures purely based on fear and lies from psychiatrists, from doctors, and most importantly, from the media. This is what happened to Chloe Cole and her parents, and it's what famously.
And that's a important thing. I think the doctors can have a tendency to maybe present it in simplistic terms, like they are utterly convinced of the outcomes, and it's like almost a certainty that if you don't do this, that bad stuff's gonna happen. And like in that scenario, I find it hard to blame parents for doing what the doctor says, because they trust the medical practice, but it's still regrettable at least.
Happened to Elon
As
Musk. This is
confidence.
why he cares so deeply about this issue. Just take a listen.
I was essentially tricked into signing documents for one of my older boys, Xavier. Uh, this was before I had really any understanding of what was going on, and we had COVID going on, and so there was a lot of confusion. Um, and I was told, oh, Xavier might commit suicide if he.
That was a lie right from the outset.
Incredibly evil. And I agree with you that the people that have been promoting this should go to prison.
It was a complete lie. They literally said, you must agree to this because your son will commit suicide if you don't.
Well, technically said he might commit suicide, but it's still kind of. It feels like emotionally that's kind of in the same realm. Your son might commit suicide if you don't do this. This is his best shot. Like, okay.
I mean, imagine
There
putting
might not have
that
been like an outright statement that this is what's going to happen, but it is kind of.
in front of a parent.
It's not good.
Obviously, parents are going to go along with it. They're not going to think that it's a lie because why would doctors tell them a lie? Why would they use fear to push an experimental procedure on this innocent child? So I want you guys to know that because when you hear the media freaking.
Well, and that's maybe an important point too. Like this was largely experimental, especially I think with regards to children. Maybe its effects wouldn't or couldn't have been studied up to this point in time because they hadn't really been done. I guess I still feel like there's a degree of culpability on the part of the doctors who maybe should have, you know, done more research. But,
out that Trump is killing trans children, that he's doing all of this legislation that will kill trans people, that gender affirming care is actually keeping trans people alive. I want you all to know that all of that is based on a lie. That is what these reports are telling us. So when you see headlines like this from the ACL.
What is the phrase they use? I'm thinking it's like life-saving or for. Oh, yeah. Doctors agree. Gender affirming care is life saving. And I've mentioned this before, gender affirming. It's a nice way of saying. It feels like it's a nice way of a slick way of saying that we're not changing anything. We're just affirming their gender. Instead of gender reassignment, which was the phrase in the beginning. Gender affirming sounds a lot nicer. Anyways, that's about it. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, please press the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment if you'd like to.